Welcome, dear listeners. Tonight, let your thoughts drift gently as we take you on a peaceful journey. This is a space for calm, for quiet moments, and for the kind of stories that settle your heart and slow your breath. Make yourself comfortable, close your eyes if you wish, and allow the world to soften around you. Now, let's begin with tonight's story. Today's story is titled, The Oakleaf Legacy: A Journey Through Hidden Histories and Silent Courage. Avery Sinclair stepped off the metro car into the mild April air, heart stirring with that familiar blend of restlessness and wonder that the onset of spring always brought. Behind her, the cherry blossoms along the Potomac were still in bloom, their pale petals drifting like soft confetti in a breeze that carried the promise of new beginnings. She tugged the collar of her light trench coat tighter against a momentary chill and checked the worn leather satchel slung over her shoulder. Inside lay a single object that had set all of this in motion, an ivory envelope addressed in exquisite copperplate script, bearing no return address, only her name. She had found it on her desk that morning, slipped beneath a stack of thesis drafts she swore she'd finished weeks ago. None of her colleagues at the Smithsonian seemed to know anything about it, and even Rowan, her closest friend since childhood, had reacted to the news with equal parts excitement and curiosity. Now, stepping into the gentle chaos of cherry blossom season, Avery felt the weight of that envelope more keenly than ever. It was lighter than a feather, yet she felt as if she carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories. A short walk brought her to the historic Alexandria Amtrak station, its brick facade warping memories of older trips taken with her grandmother. The station's clock tower chimed the half-hour as she approached, casting a golden glow across the polished wood benches. Avery's gaze lingered on the decorative molding above the ticket counter, where an eagle with outstretched wings seemed ready to lift into flight at any moment. She swallowed hard, recalling the letter's single line of instruction, "Meet me where the river whispers history." Inside, she spotted Rowan Miller leaning against a tall column, checking his phone with that impatient task she knew so well. He wore his usual ensemble of rugged jeans and a vintage leather jacket that must have come from some long-forgotten era fitting attire, Avery thought, for a town like Old Town Alexandria, where every brick seemed to hold a secret. Rowan's dark eyes lit up when he saw her, and he broke into a wide grin. "You got it?" he asked, nodding toward the satchel. "Every word," Avery replied, stepping forward. "But it's just one line. I don't even know who me is." She extracted the envelope and passed it to him. "I thought it might be from the museum, an invitation to oversee the new archives exhibit. But it doesn't match their stationery." Rowan tapped the envelope against his palm. "Maybe it's a prank. Ghost story. Treasure hunt. Either way, it sounds like our kind of weekend adventure." They purchased standing room tickets on the next shuttle train to Alexandria proper, boarding a carriage whose seats had seen countless travelers come and go. The polished metal poles gleamed under vaulted windows, and the faint hum of conversation mixed with the rumble of wheels on rails. Avery tucked the letter into her coat pocket and peered out as the train eased into motion. The cityscape transformed, modern office towers giving way to stately townhouses with gabled roofs and wrought iron balconies tangled in ivy. A sudden gust of wind rattled the carriage doors, and Avery felt a shiver of anticipation. She closed her eyes and let the rhythm of the train soothe her thoughts. This wasn't just a day trip, it felt like the opening chapter of something greater. In her mind, she saw herself exploring cobblestone lanes, uncovering hidden rooms in centuries-old taverns, and perhaps, just perhaps, discovering a connection to her grandmother's own secret history. In Alexandria. Rowan nudged her shoulder. Look, there's the river. She opened her eyes to a panoramic view. The Potomac glistened like molten silver, framed by cherry trees whose blossoms bent toward the water as if eager to taste it. Beyond, the skyline of Old Town rose in tiered red brick, the architecture unchanged for generations. It seemed impossible that just 20 minutes ago they were still in the bustle of the nation's capital. The train slowed to a halt, and they stepped onto the platform, greeted by the unmistakable scent of magnolia and the distant clang of a ferry bell. The station itself felt like a portal. Wrought iron gates opened onto narrow streets where horse-drawn carriages shared space with modern bicycles. Avery swallowed, heart pounding. Somewhere in this labyrinth of history, an unknown author had invited her to chase a story. She drew the letter from her pocket once more. On the back, in the same flowing script, was a second clue: find the keeper of Oak. Avery frowned. Keeper of Oak could be Oak Street, or the old oak tree outside that one chapel. Rowan's brow furrowed. Or maybe Oak County. But that's too broad. He flipped the envelope over in his hands. It's signed with a single initial, M. M. Avery echoed, tracing the letter M as if expecting it to glow. My grandmother's name was Margaret Sinclair before she married. Her family lived here until the 1950s. Maybe she wrote this. Rowan's expression softened. You don't think? His voice trailed off. Avery shrugged, uncertain. She had always loved her grandmother's stories of childhood escapades among these same streets, but she'd never heard mention of secret correspondences or enigmatic clues. And yet, holding that envelope in the shadow of her grandmother's old stomping grounds, a sense of destiny unfurled in her chest. They set off down King Street, the main thoroughfare where boutiques and cafes spilled into the open air beneath painted awnings. Avery paused outside an antique shop named Oak and Ember, its window display showcasing a weathered oak sideboard and flickering lanterns. Above the door, a hand-carved sign bore an oak leaf motif. Her breath caught. This could be it, she whispered. Rowan peered through the glass. Keeper of Oak, yeah, that has to be the place. He reached for her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. Ready to see what M has in store for you? Avery nodded, excitement and trepidation folding together like the petals of those spring blossoms behind her. She pushed open the door, and a soft chime announced their arrival. Inside, the air was warm with the scent of old wood and beeswax polish. She glanced around, towering shelves lined with heirloom furniture, trunks of sewing notions, and tables scattered with yellowed letters and sepia photographs. An elderly woman emerged from behind a tall stack of mahogany chairs. Her silver hair was pinned back in a loose bun, and she wore a deep green apron adorned with an embroidered oak leaf. Her eyes, bright and inquisitive, settled on Avery. "You must be Miss Sinclair," she said, her voice both gentle and unerring. "I've been expecting you." Avery's heart leapt. "You have?" She swallowed as Rowan watched in quiet wonder. The woman smiled, gesturing toward a small writing desk tucked in the corner. "Please, follow me. There is much I need to show you." As she stepped deeper into the shop, Avery felt that long-forgotten flutter of childhood or return, tempered now by the knowledge that this was no ordinary weekend jaunt. Something old and precious, her grandmother's secret, had begun to stir once more. The chime of the door closed behind them, leaving the bell's echo hanging like a promise in the air. The real story was just beginning. Avery stepped around a gleaming oak sideboard and followed the elderly keeper down a narrow aisle between towering shelves. Rowan hovered just behind her, eyes darting over every carved surface, every antique label. The shop felt alive with whispered histories, as if each piece of furniture longed to share its story. The wooden floor creaked underfoot in a rhythm that matched Avery's racing pulse. At the back of the store, beneath a stained glass window depicting an ancient oak tree, the keeper paused beside a small writing desk. "My name is Margaret," she said softly, removing her apron and folding it neatly over a nearby chair. "But here, they call me the Oakkeeper. I tend to lost memories and misplaced heirlooms." She reached into a velvet-lined drawer in the desk and withdrew a tarnished brass key. The metal glinted like a promise. "This key belonged to your grandmother, Miss Sinclair. She entrusted it to me decades ago, asking me to safeguard it until you were ready." Avery felt the breath catch in her throat. She took a trembling step forward, wrapping her fingers around the key's intricate bow. It was heavier than she expected, as though it bore the weight of the years it had waited. Her grandmother, Margaret Sinclair, was this the same M who had signed the mysterious letter? The thought sent a shiver along her spine. Margaret gestured toward the sideboard. "This piece was in your grandmother's family home, her favorite reading table. She had a secret compartment built into it. Only the key will open it." She moved aside as Avery knelt before the sideboard's lower panel. The grain of the oak was smooth, polished by countless hands, but Avery's fingers traced a faint seam in the wood. She inserted the key into a hidden keyhole, pivoted it with gentle pressure, and clicked as the panel slid outward. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with the Sinclair family crest, a stylized oak leaf encircled by a ring of acorns. Avery lifted the journal reverently, brushing away a layer of dust that seemed to have settled for decades. Rowan leaned over her shoulder, peering at the faded title, "Memories of Old Town." The pages flapped softly when she opened to the first entry, dated April 15, 1952, in flowing copperplate handwriting. Margaret motioned to a small lamp on the desk. Avery lit it, and the warm glow illuminated the first page. "My dearest future daughter, if you are reading this, then the time has come for you to learn the truth I hid. Old Town holds more than pretty sidewalks and cherry blossoms. Beneath its streets lie stories of courage, betrayal, and love. I leave this journal to guide you. Trust your heart, follow the clues, and know that I have always watched over you. M. Avery swallowed hard. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting her grandmother's words echo in her mind. She could almost hear Margaret Sinclair's voice, rich with tenderness and determination. Read on, the Oakkeeper urged gently. It will tell you what you must do next. Rowan tapped the next page, where an ink sketch showed a tall steeple framed by magnolia blossoms. A caption read, Christ Church, where history's bell still rings. Below it was another line, seek the echo of that first sermon, and you will find your path. Avery traced the drawing with her fingertip. Christ Church, she whispered. That's the one near the riverbank, where George Washington used to attend services. She glanced at Margaret. How did she know I loved history so much? Margaret smiled, her eyes twinkling. Your grandmother was more than a grandmother, she was a scholar at heart. She spent her youth chasing the past in these very streets. What she left behind was more than memories, it was a legacy. A hush fell as Avery flipped through the journal. There were pressed flowers, fragments of letters, even a small map folded into a pocket. The map traced a route from this shop, past several landmarks, a fountain in Market Square, an old guardhouse near the waterfront, and finally the base of the Christ Church steeple. Tiny circles marked points where Margaret had hidden small tokens: an antique silver thimble, a lock of ribbon, a pewter coin. Rowan exhaled, excitement warming his voice. So we need to find those tokens. Each one will lead to the next clue, until we reach the church itself. He looked to Avery. Ready for a treasure hunt in your grandmother's footsteps? Avery nodded, heart brimming with purpose. Yes. I feel like she's guiding me through time. She stood, journal in hand, and turned to Margaret. Thank you, for keeping this safe. Margaret folded her hands in her lap. Your grandmother entrusted me with many things, her key, her journal, and a simple wish that you would complete her journey. She believed that by retracing her steps, you would discover something important about yourself. Now, off you go. The first token awaits at Market Square near the fountain where the children once played. Rowan hoisted his satchel and offered Avery his arm. She linked hers through his, savoring the certainty of his presence by her side. As they walked back through the aisles of oak and ember, the chime of the front door echoed like the starting bell of an adventure. Outside, the afternoon sun had climbed higher, painting the street in bright light. Avery unfolded the little map, smoothing its crease. Market Square was only a few blocks away, a triangular plaza ringed with cobblestones and charming storefronts. From here, she could almost see the fountain's stone tiers glinting in the sunlight. They crossed King Street once more, their footsteps blending with the murmur of tourists and locals. Every signpost seemed to beckon: Market Square rightward arrow, Old Guardhouse rightward arrow, Christchurch rightward arrow. The air smelled of freshly baked bread drifting from a bakery next door, mingling with the scent of cut flowers in a vendor's cart. When they reached the fountain, a tiered basin crowned with a bronze statue of a dancing youth, they paused. Avery knelt and ran her fingers around its base. The inscription, weathered by time, was nearly unreadable: "To joy and renewal, 1791. She shone the journal's lamp on the stone, then remembered a line from Margaret's letter, where laughter once rang, "Your first token hides." Avery closed her eyes and listened to the faint echoes of children's giggles in her memory, as if the fountain still kept the sound within its waters. She pressed her palm against the cool stone, feeling for any irregularity. After a moment, her fingers brushed against a small projection, a discreet silver clasp. She tugged gently, and a hidden compartment popped open. Inside lay a delicate silver thimble engraved with an oak leaf motif. Avery lifted the thimble to the light, marveling at its craftsmanship. Rowan grinned. "One down, 2 to go." Avery placed the thimble in her satchel and closed the compartment, winking at the fountain. "Thank you, Grandma." She looked up at Rowan, anticipation dancing in her eyes. "Shall we find the next one?" Rowan offered his hand, and together they set off toward the guardhouse near the waterfront, the journal tucked securely under Avery's arm. With each step, the past and present converged beneath their feet, guiding them deeper into the mystery Margaret Sinclair had woven 50 years ago and showing Avery that history is never really behind us, but always waiting to be rediscovered. The late afternoon sun had begun its descent when Avery and Rowan reached the weathered stone facade of the old guardhouse. Situated just a few paces from the Potomac's edge, the building stood like an unassuming sentinel, its low arches and narrow windows hinting at centuries of watchful duty. Avery paused on the cobblestones, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face as she studied the carved date above the doorway, 1787. The chill breeze off the river tugged at her coat, and she shivered, suddenly aware of how exposed they were out here in the open. "Looks abandoned," Rowan murmured, stepping close. The two of them stood side by side beneath a rusted iron lantern that swung gently with the wind. Avery could almost hear the echoes of colonial muskets and the shuffle of soldiers on patrol. Rowan rapped on the heavy oak door with a confident knuckle tap. "Let's see if there's an inscription or," he trailed off, noticing a small brass plaque set into the wood. Avery crouched, wiping away years of grime until she could make out a single line. "Lua Sauchep. He who stands guard beneath freedom's voice shall find the next token." Avery's heart thumped. Freedom's voice, the bell. Margaret said something about the echo of that first sermon. She straightened and glanced at the journal. Sure enough, the next page bore a simple sketch of the guardhouse itself, with the words, "Here, the young patriots once stood. Listen for liberty's call." Beneath the drawing, in fine script, was another riddle: when history's horn has sounded clear, lift the sentinel's ring to draw it near. A horn. A sentinel's ring. Rowan echoed, rubbing his chin. Sentinel's ring could be the iron ring around that old cannon over there. He pointed through the doorway to a rusted naval cannon perched on a stone base, its barrel still aimed out at the river. Avery followed his gaze and noticed a heavy iron ring bolted to the cannon's side, a makeshift towing point, perhaps, but here it took on a new significance. "Let's try it," she said, drawing in a breath. She pushed open the door, it creaked loudly, revealing a small, dim interior. Dust motes danced in the fading light. The walls were lined with wooden racks that once held muskets and bayonets, and above them, narrow arrow slits offered a view of the river beyond. Avery's boots tapped softly on the uneven flagstone floor as she approached the cannon. The iron ring was cold and rough under her fingertips. She slid a gloved hand through the ring and gave it a firm pull. At first nothing happened, but then she felt a subtle click from the floorboards behind the cannon. Rowan, flashlight in hand, illuminated the base. Between two slabs of stone, a seam glowed briefly where a hidden compartment had sprung open. Avery knelt and peered inside. There, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a bundle tied with burgundy ribbon. Carefully, she lifted the bundle and untied the knot, revealing a single lock of ribbon dyed a deep, wine-red hue, looped through an ornate pewter coin stamped with the profile of George Mason. Avery's fingers trembled as she held the coin up to the light. On its reverse side, 4 words were etched in tiny letters, "Where bells first rang." Rowan exhaled, relief and excitement in his voice. "That fits the Christ Church clue perfectly. That coin must be Margaret's second token." He grinned at her. "You're 2 for 2. Avery tucked the coin and ribbon into her satchel, then slid the stone panel closed. The guardhouse interior seemed to exhale around them as if acknowledging their success. She stood and turned to Rowan. "Thank you," she said softly. "I never expected there to be riddles or traps." She offered him a wry smile. Rowan laughed and draped an arm around her shoulders. "You've got the mind for puzzles. I'm just here for moral support." His warmth eased the prickling tension in her shoulders. "Now, Christ Church. We might have time to catch the evening bell service." They pushed back through the guardhouse door and stepped into the cooling air. The sky had shifted from gold to a pale lavender, and clouds scudded low, promising rain. Avery glanced at the river where a ferry's horn called across the water. The sound reverberated like an ancient trumpet, and she felt a pang of connection, as if the past itself were cheering them on. They hurried back up the cobblestone path to King Street, Astria's old bookshop whizzing past on their right and a line of bistro tables on their left. Street lights flickered alive, casting pools of amber glow. Avery unfolded the map again, tracing the route to Christ Church, their next destination. She felt the journal's presence in her satchel like a companion, guiding her steps. As they rounded the corner, the steeple came into view, piercing the twilight sky. The church's white wooden facade gleamed under lantern light, and rows of stained glass windows glowed with warm hues from within. A single figure, a young choirboy, perhaps, stood on the porch, adjusting a set of aged brass bells before slipping inside. Avery paused at the churchyard gate. The air was rich with the scent of magnolia and damp earth, and she could hear the soft murmur of voices from inside the sanctuary. The stones of the churchyard path were smooth, worn by countless footsteps over centuries. She slipped off her shoes and let the cool breeze brush across her bare feet for a moment, drawing a deep breath. "Come on," Rowan whispered, gently tugging her arm. "We don't want to miss the bell." Inside, the sanctuary was hushed. Long pews of dark oak stretched toward an altar bathed in candlelight. The choir, dressed in simple robes, stood in a semicircle, their voices rising in a soft hymn. "Come, let us praise the Lord with joyous song." The melody rose and fell, as if breathing. Avery closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. She felt goosebumps on her arms, the power of the hymn resonating within her chest. At the hymn's end, a single bell tolled, a clear, sonorous note that seemed to linger in the rafters. It rang again, twice more, each echo sailing through the nave and into the night. Avery felt it in her bones, like a heartbeat borne on air. When the third toll faded, Avery opened her eyes and saw a spotlight of moonlight shining through a stained glass window, illuminating a small trapdoor set into the floor near the pulpit. The polished wood around it was slightly raised, just enough to catch her eye in the dimness. "Look there," she whispered, pointing. Rowan turned, expression alight. "The echo of that sermon, we found it." He knelt by the trapdoor and lifted it carefully. Inside lay a small velvet pouch, and when he drew it out, Avery saw that it contained a tiny pewter key and a folded slip of parchment. She unfolded the parchment and read the words penned in her grandmother's hand. "You have heard freedom's sound. Now, unlock the door to your own story. Seek the vault beneath the Sinclair name." Avery's breath caught in her throat. A vault, beneath the Sinclair name. She glanced at the key and then at the journal, her mind racing. Margaret had hidden yet another layer, one closer to home, something that would reveal family secrets Avery had never imagined. Rowan offered the key back with a steady hand. "Looks like your grandmother knew you'd be brave enough to follow her path all the way. Are you ready for what comes next?" Avery's fingers closed around the pewter key. Her eyes glittered with determination. "I am. Let's finish this." They rose together, the choir's final notes fading behind them as they stepped into the night. Somewhere beneath the streets of Old Town Alexandria, a family vault awaited, and within it, the heart of a mystery that would change Avery's life forever. Avery stepped out of Christ Church into a hush of lantern-lit streets, the pewter key warm in her palm. Rowan closed the trapdoor behind them, and together they retraced their steps down King Street, the air cool with approaching night. Every lamp they passed seemed to wink in anticipation, as though the town itself urged them onward. Back at Oak and Ember, the oakkeeper Margaret awaited them in the front parlor, poised beside a Gothic-style cabinet. Her silver hair was pinned with an antique comb carved into an oak leaf, an unspoken emblem of the journey they shared. Margaret's aquamarine eyes shone with pride. "You have followed your grandmother's clues with courage and grace," she said, her voice measured yet kind. Now you hold the key to her final secret. Avery inhaled, heart pounding. She extended the pewter key toward Margaret, unsure of what to expect next. Where do we go? Margaret nodded toward a large, leather-bound ledger resting on the cabinet's surface. This is the registry of Alexandria's founding families. Your grandmother's name appears here under the Sinclairs, alongside many who shaped this town in the 18th century. But the true vault lies not in stone or steel, but in devotion to family legacy. She flipped through the thick pages until she found a section titled Sinclair Family Crypt. Beneath St. Paul's Episcopal Church, there is a small family vault built into the crypt wall. It has been sealed for generations. Only the key you carry will open it. Avery's breath caught. She remembered her grandmother's stories of Sunday services at St. Paul's, the way sunlight would filter through the stained glass, casting jeweled patterns on the flagstones. Rowan slipped an arm around her shoulders. Then that's where we go. Margaret extended a hand, placing the ledger gently in Avery's satchel. Be mindful, she warned. That vault contains more than objects. It holds truths your grandmother believed you were ready to discover and that you alone can honor. Outside, the moon had slipped free of clouds and now bathed the street in silver light. Rowan hailed a horse-drawn carriage, one of the few still in service for evening tours, and within moments they were rattling down cobblestones toward St. Paul's. The church loomed ahead, its Gothic arches and lancet windows dark against the sky. A lone lantern at the entrance glowed like a beacon. They disembarked and approached the heavy oak door. The carriage driver tipped his hat and left them to their task. Avery's fingers tightened around the pewter key as she pushed the door open. Inside, the nave was silent except for the drip of a lone candle burning beside the baptismal font. Shadows danced across pews carved with centuries of initials and symbols, a tapestry of lives once lived. A narrow wooden staircase led down to the crypt below. The steps were worn smooth by countless pilgrims, and with every footfall Avery felt the weight of history pressing gently on her. At the bottom, they entered a vaulted stone chamber lined with alcoves. Each alcove bore a brass nameplate, Washington, Mason, Ramsey, names Avery recognized from her grandmother's research. Finally, toward the far wall, she saw it, an arched recess sealed by a weathered iron door, its surface etched with an oak leaf surrounded by acorns. Above it, in raised letters, read, Sinclair Family Vault. Avery swallowed, stepping closer. The iron door rested within a Gothic stone frame carved by long-gone masons, their chisel marks still visible. Rowan held his lantern high, illuminating the keyhole at its center. Margaret's warning echoed in her mind, more than objects. She slid the pewter key into the lock, its fit perfect, as though crafted for this moment alone. With a soft click and a groan of aged hinges, the door swung inward on silent bearings. Inside lay a small chamber lit by a single shaft of moonlight from a hidden window high above. The air smelled of dust and time. In the center stood a stone sarcophagus topped by an open book carved in relief, and at its foot, a wooden chest bound with leather straps. Avery crossed the threshold, her heart hammering in her ears. Rowan stood at her elbow, offering silent support. She approached the chest, running a fingertip along its rim. Its lock was a simple hasp, far too plain for a secret of this magnitude, but the pewter key would not fit. Instead, she noticed a carved oak leaf where the hasp met the lid. Pressing it, she heard a click. Rowan steadied the chest as she lifted the heavy lid, revealing a velvet-lined interior. Inside lay 3 items: a slender leather journal bound in emerald green, a silver locket on a fine chain, and a sealed parchment tied with crimson ribbon. The journal's cover bore an oak leaf inlaid with mother of pearl, and beneath it, faint letters spelled, Margaret Sinclair. Avery gingerly lifted the journal. It opened to a pressed sprig of magnolia, her grandmother's favorite flower, and on the facing page was a brief handwritten note. To my precious Avery. You have found the heart of our story. These pages hold the journey I could not share in life, the dreams I forged alone, and the truths I dare you to carry forward. The locket holds the face of our ancestors, and the letter will guide you when all else seems lost. Love, always M. She turned to Rowan, tears glistening. She did this for me. Her voice trembled. All of this, she wanted me to know. She unwrapped the crimson ribbon from the parchment and broke its seal. As she read the first lines, Rowan watched her face shift from wonder to solemn understanding. My sweetest Avery. If you are reading this, then my time on earth has passed. I fear I must confess the secret I held close for too long. In 1954, I witnessed an event that challenged everything I believed about this town's history. I joined a quiet resistance, neighbors who fought for equality in the face of Jim Crow laws. We met in secret tunnels beneath Old Town and used these passages to help families find safe passage north. This coin you found, the ribbon, and now this letter marked the path I walked. I leave you this charge: carry our story into the light. Avery's hands shook as she continued reading. The letter detailed names of people she had never heard of, including one, Thomas Baker, a young African-American clerk who had saved her grandmother's life one bitter winter day. Margaret's words spoke of his courage and of promises whispered in damp corridors. She wrote of fear and hope, shame and pride. Rowan placed his hand on her shoulder. Avery, this is incredible. His voice was thick. Your grandmother was a hero. Avery closed the parchment, pressing it to her heart. She looked up at the carved ceiling of the vault, feeling the presence of generations around her. She was more than a scholar, she whispered. She was a bridge between past and future. And now it's my turn to finish what she started. They gathered the journal, locket, and letter, placing them reverently into Avery's satchel. As they secured the chest and closed the sarcophagus door, a faint breeze stirred the candle flame beside them, as though the vault itself sighed in relief. Exiting the crypt, Avery felt every step lift a weight from her chest. The moonlight at the top of the stairs felt like a benediction. Rowan offered his arm, guiding her back into the church. In the nave, The empty pews welcomed them as if affirming her grandmother's legacy. Walking into the night, with the Sinclair journal tucked safely against her side, Avery realized the journey had grown beyond riddles and tokens. It was now a quest to honor lives that had shaped her own. In that moment, she vowed to share Margaret's story with the world, a tale of hidden courage, of family bonds, and of a love that transcends time. And though the air was cold, Avery felt a warmth within her chest, an ember of purpose that would burn bright for the rest of her days. Avery stood at the corner of Duke and South Washington Streets, the Sinclair journal clutched in her hand, the weight of her grandmother's legacy pressing warmly against her hip. The letter had spoken of secret tunnels beneath Old Town, hidden corridors carved out of brick and stone long before the first tourists strolled these streets. Now, under a crescent moon, Avery and Rowan peered at the soot-darkened wall of a centuries-old warehouse, where a narrow alley yawned between two shuttered storefronts. Margaret mentioned a back entrance on Duke Street, Avery whispered, squinting at a faded iron door that looked like it hadn't been opened since Prohibition. A padlock hung loosely, long since rusted through at one hinge. The letters JMB were scratched into the metal initials she recognized from her grandmother's notes, Josephine Mills Baker, the woman who had converted one section of the tunnel network into a temporary safe house in the 1950s. Rowan pressed his shoulder against the door. It groaned as it swung inward, revealing a flight of narrow wooden steps descending into darkness. Avery hesitated, the beam from her flashlight revealing graffiti-etched bricks and oily footprints that led downward. Her grandmother's handwriting popped into her mind, "Trust only the light you carry in your heart, and in your hand." She clicked on her flashlight, its beam cutting a bright arc through the gloom. Rowan followed suit, and hand in hand they stepped onto the first creaking plank. The air underground was cool and damp, carrying the faint heady scent of earth and time. Each step echoed softly in the tunnel's vaulted brick ceiling, and Avery could almost imagine the muffled echoes of whispered instructions and ragged breaths of families hiding from danger. They rounded a bend, passing a low archway that led into a side passage. Here, the floor was uneven where bricks had settled, and old water stains ran in rivulets down the walls. Avery consulted the journal's entry titled "Tunnels of Mercy," which contained her grandmother's hurried annotations in the margins, "Follow the arrow of moss to the chamber where we painted hope." She swept her light across the walls until she saw a green patch of moss clinging to the mortar at shoulder height, above a crudely painted arrow. It pointed toward a low doorway sealed by a plank of rotting wood. Avery exchanged a glance with Rowan, then knelt and pushed the plank aside. A low chamber lay beyond, its ceiling barely 6 feet high. On a wooden bench along one wall rested artifacts of the past, a battered wooden crate stamped with the Sinclair family crest, 2 oilcloth satchels, and a faded canvas tent folded neatly in the corner. Rowan stepped forward, lifting the crate lid, where he discovered a small tin box containing cigarette lighter tokens from a bygone era and a tiny vial of tincture labeled Opal's Comfort. Avery recognized Opal as one of the women who had nursed the escaping families through fever and fear. She picked up the vial gently, turning it around to read her grandmother's handwriting, "A medicine of mercy, given freely." "This is incredible," Rowan breathed. "Grandma's in-laws helped hide more people here than anywhere else." Avery nodded, tears prickling. She placed the vial in her satchel and inspected the satchels. Inside each was a folded scrap of paper, more riddles, more clues. She opened the first and read, "Where waters rise to meet the sky, beneath the bridge of iron bones, you'll see the lantern's final glow." The second read, "Within the rose garden's silent heart, under petals that never fall, rests the key to every door." Avery tucked both clues into her journal's front pocket. The bridge of iron bones, that had to be the railroad bridge spanning the Potomac, known locally as Iron Horse Bridge. And the rose garden, she thought of Jones Point Park, where an old rose arbor stood near the water's edge. Rowan shone his light back toward the entrance. "We should mark this spot," he said. He found an old piece of chalk in his pocket left over from a college art project and scrawled a small oak leaf emblem on the lintel above the side doorway. "So we can find our way back." Avery smiled, her heart soaring. "Good idea. Let's move on." They retraced their steps, the flashlight beams dancing along the brick ribs of the tunnel until they reached the wooden stairway. The stale mustiness gave way to a faint breeze as they emerged into the alley once more. The night air felt expansive, and Avery inhaled deeply, the scent of mullein and river moisture mingling around her. "First stop, Iron Horse Bridge," she said, adjusting her satchel. Rowan locked eyes with her, excitement evident in his grin. "Then the rose garden." They hurried down the cobblestone street toward the waterfront, where the old railroad bridge loomed overhead like a skeletal spine of steel. The river's dark surface rippled beneath swaying lamppost reflections. Avery shivered, both from the chill and from anticipation. At the bridge's foot, she found a battered iron lamp bracket bolted to a stone pier, its bracket empty. Rowan knelt and pressed his palm against the stone until his stare caught a glint, a brass handle hidden in a seam. He yanked, and a small iron lantern rolled free onto the cobblestones, its glass pane still intact. "Lantern's final glow," Avery murmured, lifting it. Inside, she discovered a folded parchment sealed with red wax bearing the Sinclair crest. She snapped a small brass latch and unfolded the parchment. "Carry this lantern where night would hide you, to where the lantern's light is never denied. Beneath the arbor of silent bloom, a secret lies entwined in petals." Avery held the lantern high and glanced at Rowan. "Next is the rose garden." They followed the Riverwalk path toward Jones Point Park, passing fishing piers and the skeletal remains of old bollards that once held mighty ships. When they reached the park's eastern edge, a worn wooden arch draped in overgrown rose vines greeted them. The petals were pale pink despite the season, and their fragrance hung in the air like a whispered promise. Sunlight had long since faded, but Avery held the lantern aloft, its wick alight with a tiny flame. The lantern's glow illuminated a mosaic of fallen petals at their feet. Avery traced her finger along the edge of the stone bench beneath the arbor, where a faint inscription was carved, in bloom, "We stand united." Directly beneath, the ground was soft and loose. She knelt and brushed aside rose petals until her fingers closed around another small, iron ring. She tugged, and a circular metal plate gave way, revealing a hidden cavity. Inside lay a petite silver key engraved with a single word, sonata. Rowan's eyes widened. Sonata, that has to be the title of the music box in the Christ Church vestry. Avery nodded, tucking the new key into her satchel. But look. She lifted the metal plate to reveal beneath it a small ledger with a single entry, Opal's diary. Seek the tune that carries her song. Her grandmother's handwriting curled along the margin, a melody for the weary. A thrill ran through Avery. Each token was more than an object, each was a testament to someone whose courage and compassion carved a hidden path through history. She brushed a strand of hair from her face, determination bright in her eyes. One more place, Christ Church vestry. We have to find Opal's diary and the music box. Rowan offered his arm and helped her to her feet. Together they stepped out of the rose arbor, the lantern's glow receding behind them as they made their way back toward the church steeple that still watched over Old Town. As they rounded the corner onto King Street, Avery felt not fear but a fierce sense of purpose. In her satchel lay the silver key and the lantern, the vial, the thimble, the coin, the pewter key, and now Sonata's key, all pieces of an intricate puzzle her grandmother had carefully assembled. Each new clue spoke of people long gone but whose spirits still whispered beneath the cobblestones and beneath the river's dark waters. They reached Christ Church just as midnight bells began to toll. Their echoes rang across empty streets. Avery stopped in the moonlight, taking it all in. She knew that by dawn, she would be holding Opal's diary, be playing the melody her grandmother loved, and discovering an even deeper truth about the bonds that tied family, community, and history together. Rowan squeezed her hand. Ready for the final step. Avery looked up at the illuminated steeple and pressed her palm to her heart. More than ever. With the silver key glinting in her fingers and Rowan by her side, Avery stepped through the church doors, the midnight bells fading behind them like a hymn of hope. Avery and Rowan emerged from the rose arbor under a canopy of pale moonlight, the silver key engraved with the single word sonata warming in Avery's palm. They hurried along the narrow brick walk that led back toward Christ Church, lantern in hand, each footstep echoing like a drum beat in the hushed night. The steeple rose above them, its white clapboard siding glowing softly against a sky smattered with stars. Inside, they could still hear the faint hum of midnight bells retreating into the darkness. They slipped through the heavy wooden doors, which closed behind them with a solemn thud. The sanctuary was empty now, the pews cleared of choir robes and hymnals. Candle sconces along the walls cast a golden glow that danced across the stone floor. Avery lifted the lantern, and Rowan carried his flashlight as they stepped quietly toward the vestry door at the back of the nave. A small sign above the door read "Vestry" in gilded letters. Margaret's journal had mentioned a hidden music box here, the final testament of Opal's mercy. Avery's heart beat faster. She pressed the sonata key into the lock, a perfect fit, and turned it with a gentle click. The door swung inward to reveal a modest room lined with dark walnut cabinets and a tall window draped in violet velvet. The air inside smelled faintly of old incense and polished pine. On a wooden table in the center of the room lay a small mahogany box, its surface inlaid with mother-of-pearl vines that curled into an elegant oak leaf. A brass plate on its front reads simply Opal's Song. Avery knelt before the box and set the key into its lock. Rowan hovered nearby, his flashlight trained on the intricate inlay. With a measured turn, Avery twisted the key until the lock popped free. She lifted the lid and a soft, tinkling melody drifted out, as delicate as a lullaby. The music box played a gentle strain Avery recognized from an old church anthem her grandmother had taught her long ago. Inside, nestled in velvet lining, were two items, a tiny leather-bound diary no larger than her palm, and a silver locket suspended on a thin chain. Avery lifted the diary first, its cover embossed with the words Opal Baker, caretaker of life. She turned the pages paper thin and yellowed with time and found an entry dated February 14, 1953. My heart sings tonight, though it trembles with fear. The tunnels are safe for now, but more must be done to protect those we serve. I carry this song close to my soul, a promise that hope will shine even in the darkest hours. Tomorrow, we meet by the organ loft for the final blessing. May this melody guide our steps, and may every echo remind us why we endure. Avery's breath caught. Opal's handwriting was firm yet quivering, revealing courage amidst uncertainty. She traced the date with a fingertip. February 14th. Valentine's Day had always been her grandmother's secret day of pilgrimage to Christ Church. No one else knew that. Rowan leaned over to read, his face solemn. She wrote of an organ loft blessing, that must be the sanctuary up there. Avery nodded. She closed the diary and picked up the locket. On its surface was etched the same stylized oak leaf she'd seen on the Sinclair crest. She opened it and discovered a tiny black and white portrait, a young woman with kind eyes, Opal herself standing next to a slight, smiling man whose uniform hinted at military service. Beneath the portrait, etched in minute letters, were two names, Opal Baker and Thomas Baker. The same Thomas Baker her grandmother had mentioned as a hero in the tunnels. Rowan caught her eye. That must be him. The man who saved her life and so many others. He closed the locket gently. Together, they were partners in this work of mercy. Avery pressed her palm to her chest, an ache of gratitude and loss blooming inside her. She closed the music box and set both items into her satchel. Her mind raced. Opal's diary contained more than memories, it held a clue. She flipped to the final page and found a single line underlined twice. Where voices soared, the choir will carry our vow. Beneath it was a hastily drawn sketch of an open doorway beneath the organ loft, with a small arrow pointing upward. Avery closed the diary. The choir loft, she whispered. That's where they held their last ceremony. We need to climb up there. Rowan stood and swept his light over the vestry. There's a narrow stair behind the pulpit, just off the side aisle. I saw it when we came through. They moved back into the sanctuary, lantern held high. The pews stretched on either side of a wide central aisle carpeted in deep burgundy. Sunlight from stained glass windows had long since faded, leaving only moonlight to filter through colored panes of purple and green. At the front, the pulpit stood to the right, and behind it, a small door led to a steep, winding staircase. Avery opened that side door and stepped onto the stairs, feeling the cool stone under her boots. Rowan followed, his flashlight illuminating carved figures of angels playing trumpets along the walls. The stair curved upward, narrowing until it opened onto a wooden landing beneath the organ pipes. The loft was a small open space with a balustrade overlooking the sanctuary. Rows of old wooden choir stalls curved in a semicircle, each bearing carved initials and simple symbols, oak leaves, crosses, chalices. Avery knelt beside one of the stalls and ran her fingers over the wood. She paused at a carved symbol that matched the oak leaf from Opal's locket. Beneath it, etched barely visibly, were the letters Tob, Thomas O. Baker. She pressed her palm against the stall's side, recalling the diary's words, "Where voices soared, the choir will carry our vow." She glanced at the row of stalls and noticed that the seat beneath the oak leaf carving could pivot upward. She lifted it, revealing a small compartment set into the stall's frame. Inside lay a sealed vellum scroll tied with olive green ribbon. Her hands trembled as she lifted the scroll. Rowan peered over her shoulder as she unrolled it. In flowing script were the words, "To those who find this scroll, know that our song is more than melody, it is the sound of freedom's promise. We blessed each passage with this vow, none shall be left behind. Now, carry our story beyond these walls. Seek the final gathering place where water and word unite, and lay this scroll upon the waters for truth to flow." A silence fell between them, heavy with meaning. Avery rolled the scroll and secured it in her satchel beside Opal's diary and the locket. The choir loft seemed to hold its breath, the organ pipes looming overhead like silent sentinels. Rowan broke the hush. The final gathering place, water and word, could be the public reading dock on the riverfront, where sermons were preached to those who could not enter sanctuary. He tapped his chin. Or the pier outside the old Baptistery by Market Square, where water was used to welcome new members. Avery's eyes shone. "Dad used to take me to the Baptistery when I was small." The stone steps led into the river itself. If they baptized those who escaped through the tunnels, that would make sense they'd enter the river for safety and renewal. Rowan nodded. And the scroll could be laid on the water, carried downstream as a testament. He smiled, though his eyes glistened in the lantern light. "Your grandmother and her friends ended their journey with a blessing at the water's edge. Now it's up to us to bring that blessing into the light." Avery felt a wave of resolve swell within her. She closed the door to the choir loft and descended the staircase, the scroll heavy in her satchel but lighter in her heart. They paused at the vestry door one last time. Avery pressed her palm against the latch as if saying goodbye to Opal's song. Outside, the night awaited, alive with possibilities. Avery inhaled the cool air, tinged with river mist and magnolia blossoms. She looked at Rowan. "Let's finish this. Let's bring their story to life." He offered his arm, and she slipped hers through his. They stepped into the moonlit streets of Old Town Alexandria, carrying with them the echoes of hidden voices, the melody of mercy, and a vow that would flow on water until truth was set free. Avery and Rowan emerged from the narrow side alley into a hush of pre-dawn stillness. The world felt suspended. Invisible currents of mist drifted above the cobblestones, and the Potomac beyond gleamed like burnished silver. Clutched against Avery's chest was the vellum scroll, Opal's final testament. On its crisp surface, her grandmother's careful script promised that water and word unite in the place they must find. Rowan slid an arm around Avery's shoulders, his breath warming her neck. "The baptistery," he whispered. "Under the east wall of Christ Church. We saw the stone steps when we climbed to the choir loft." Avery nodded. She tightened her coat around her and squared her shoulders. This was the last step in her grandmother's journey, a moment she had longed to reach, even before the ivory envelope first drew her here. They followed the narrow lane that led past the church's white clapboard siding, now ghostly in the dawn light. Beneath a weathered plaque commemorating the town's earliest settlers, Avery found a small iron slot where a hidden latch lived. She inserted the pewter key one final time, turned it, and heard a soft click. The stone slab beside the plaque swung inward on concealed hinges, revealing a moss-covered staircase descending into darkness. A hush fell. Rowan clicked on his flashlight, the beam slicing through the gloom to reveal 6 worn stone steps slick with river mist. Avery inhaled, steeling herself, then descended the stairs, one careful foot in front of the other. By the time they reached the bottom, the air smelled of cold water and wet stone. They entered a small vaulted chamber hewn from blue-gray sandstone. At its center, beneath a circular oculus in the ceiling, lay a shallow stone pool, its surface perfectly still. Gentle ripples at the pool's edge betrayed the river's heartbeat. The walls were lined with niches once used to store baptismal robes, now empty but for a few rusted hooks. In one corner stood a solitary iron brazier, embers glowing faintly as though expecting them. Avery's flashlight swept the chamber's curves until she found it, a stone lectern carved with the Sinclair oak leaf, its sloping top perfect for holding the scroll. She set the lantern on its wrought iron stand, ignited the last flickering coal in the brazier, and felt a hush deepen around her. Rowan knelt by the pool's edge, his reflection distorted by the stone. "The words," he murmured. "We should read her vow aloud, as she wished." He looked up, eyes steady. "Are you ready?" Avery nodded, pulling the scroll from her satchel. The vellum felt alive beneath her fingertips, as if pulsing with the hope and sacrifice it contained. Clearing her throat, she began. "To those who find this scroll, know that our song is more than melody, it is the sound of freedom's promise. We blessed each passage with this vow, none shall be left behind. Now, carry our story beyond these walls. Seek the final gathering place where water and word unite, and lay this scroll upon the waters for truth to flow." Her voice echoed softly in the chamber, each word reverberating against stone and water. When she finished, a hush settled again, weighty, reverent. The brazier flared for a heartbeat, as if in approval, then dimmed. Avery took a steadying breath. She stepped to the pool's edge and knelt, unfolding the scroll so that both Rowan and the chamber's gentle current could see it. With deliberate care, she placed the vellum atop the pool's glassy surface. The scroll floated, its edges curling as it caught the faint breeze from above. Slowly, it drifted away from the lectern, carried by the water toward a narrow channel that led back to the river. Rowan caught her hand, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "She did it," he whispered. "Margaret's final vow is free on the water, as she intended." Avery nodded, pressing her other hand over her heart. "And now it's ours to fulfill." She watched the scroll vanish into the darkness beyond the chamber's arch, knowing it would soon find daylight and remind anyone who saw it of the courage and compassion that had flowed in these hidden tunnels. They stood in silence for a long moment before Rowan took a small brass whistle from his pocket, the same one Margaret had described in her journal as the signal of hope. He lifted it to his lips and blew a single clear note, the sound rising like a prayer. In the stillness, it felt as though the entire town held its breath, then exhaled in unison. Avery took Rowan's hand and guided him to the narrow steps. As they climbed, the first rosy fingers of dawn touched the sky above the church. The iron slab swung closed behind them, sealing the baptistery once more but leaving its promise unlocked in the river's flow. Outside, the world was waking. A ferryman guided his skiff across the Potomac, and gulls wheeled overhead, their cries greeting the day. Avery and Rowan climbed the steep path back to King Street, the steady glow of lanterns and shop windows welcoming them home. As they passed the torpedo factory and the Spite House, Avery felt each landmark imbued with new meaning. Every shadow held a story, every stone a memory. The scroll they had set free overnight would carry their ancestors' vow to anyone who found it, slipping gently into history's current. At Market Square, the fountain's tears glimmered in the early light. Avery paused, placing her palm on the cool stone rim, recalling the silver thimble she had discovered there. She closed her eyes and whispered a promise, "I will tell your story." Rowan stood beside her, hand at her back. "Your grandmother dreamed of this moment," he said softly. "She wanted the world to know what they did." Avery nodded, breathing deeply. "And now we will make sure they're never forgotten." She opened her satchel and laid out Opal's diary, the silver locket, the brass key, and the emerald journal. Each artifact had its story, each name its magic. Together, they formed a tapestry of lives woven into the town's hidden past. Rowan smiled. "What happens next?" "Publishing articles. A documentary." He looked at Avery with excitement. She returned his smile, eyes bright with determination. "All of the above." "A book." "A lecture series at the Smithsonian." "Exhibits in the museum." "We'll bring these stories out of the shadows, so everyone can see the bravery, the grace, and the love that shaped this place." They fell into step, walking slowly back toward the heart of Old Town. Avery glanced at the rising sun, feeling the warmth not just on her cheeks but in her soul. The journey her grandmother began had led them through riddles and echoes, through hidden chambers and secret kindnesses. In the end, it pointed them toward a promise as old as time, that no story, no act of mercy, should ever be truly lost. And as they crossed the final stretch toward the waterfront, Avery knew that Margaret Sinclair's greatest gift was not a key, a journal, or a music box. It was the living truth that history belongs to all of us, and that each generation must claim it, share it, and carry it forward on the current of human compassion. With Rowan at her side and the morning light guiding their path, she stepped onto the pier where the river met the town, ready to begin the next chapter one George Washington himself would have been proud to witness. Early spring sunlight filtered through the antique mulionate windows of the Alexandria Historical Society, warming the hushed gallery where rows of display cases waited expectantly. Avery Sinclair stood at the threshold, her satchel slung over one shoulder, beside Rowan Miller, who carried a slim portfolio bulging with maps, photographs, and printed transcripts. Between them lay the treasures they had spent days uncovering: Margaret Sinclair's emerald journal, Opal Baker's leather-bound diary, the silver locket, the vial of Opal's comfort, the pewter coin, the thimble, the worn brass whistle, and the tiny mahogany music box. Today was the culmination of their journey, the grand opening of the exhibit they had titled Hidden Histories, Secrets of the Sinclair Resistance. The gallery walls had been painted a gentle dove gray, chosen to let the artifact's colors, deep green leather, burnished metal, and aged parchment, stand in sharp relief. Spotlights were trained on each piece, the Oakleaf inlay glowed beneath the music box's glass case, the ribbon on Thomas Baker's photograph gleamed under its own miniature lamp, and the folded parchment from St. Paul's crypt lay open, the lines of Margaret's confession elegantly scripted across the page. Dr. Emma Caldwell, the Society's chief curator, greeted them at the entrance wearing a tailored navy suit and an expression of genuine excitement. Avery, Rowan, welcome. Your work is extraordinary. We've never hosted an exhibit like this, part scrapbook, part detective story, all woven into a narrative of courage. She led them past the freestanding panels that introduced the project, timeline graphics tracing Old Town Alexandria's history, photographs of the tunnel's entrance, and a large reproduction of the ivory envelope that began this quest. Avery felt her heart hammer. Thank you, Dr. Caldwell. We wanted visitors to feel the same sense of discovery we did piecing together clues across time. She nodded toward a cluster of visitors gathering near a digital kiosk. The interactive map will let them explore the tunnels virtually, and there's an audio station where they can hear the music box's melody and the whistle's clear note. Rowan adjusted the touch-screen display, which showed an overhead view of the secret passages beneath the cobblestones. And we've included transcripts from Opal's diary, he added. Lecture recordings. 2 professors of American history from the local university volunteered to discuss the broader context of civil rights resistance in the 1950s. Dr. Caldwell beamed. This is exactly the kind of community-driven history we strive for. You've made the past feel alive. As the opening hour approached, Avery took a steadying breath and stepped up to the small podium set before a semicircle of chairs. On the wall behind her, a portrait of Margaret Sinclair, an aged photograph they had restored, hung framed in polished oak. A soft murmur rippled through the audience, local students, historians in tweed jackets, members of the Sinclair and Baker families, and curious tourists drawn by an announcement on the Society's website. Rowan gave her a reassuring smile. She cleared her throat and began. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. 2 months ago, I received an ivory envelope bearing only my name and a single line, "Meet me where the river whispers history." That simple invitation led me on a journey through the heart of Old Town Alexandria, through hidden doors, forgotten chapel crypts, and secret tunnels where brave souls fought injustice in the quiet of night. Today, we honor those souls by sharing their story with you. She paused as the audience leaned forward. My grandmother, Margaret Sinclair, left behind a series of clues: an emerald journal, a pressed magnolia leaf, a music box tucked in Christ Church's vestry, and a final scroll laid upon water in the hidden baptistery. Each artifact tells a story of neighbors who risked everything to guide fleeing families toward freedom and dignity. Their names, Opal and Thomas Baker, Josephine Mills Baker, and countless others, are etched into our town's subtle history. A hush settled as she stepped aside, allowing Dr. Caldwell to cue the exhibit's video montage, flickering black and white footage of the tunnel's brickwork, slow pans over the artifacts, and interviews with local elders who remembered stories passed down through generations. The music box's gentle melody played softly as captions described the diary entries, and then the screen faded to a photograph of the baptismal chamber's stone pool, where the final scroll had drifted under Margaret's vow. When the lights came up, families and friends rose to their feet in applause. Avery felt tears prickle, but she held her ground, grateful for every face in the crowd, many of whom had contributed oral histories, old letters, and photographs to the project. She noticed an elderly woman in the front row wearing a silver brooch in the shape of an oak leaf. After the applause died down, the woman approached the podium, her hands trembling slightly. "Miss Sinclair," she said, her voice low and rich with emotion. "My name is Clara Mason. Josephine Mills Baker was my aunt, and Thomas Baker was my grandfather. I thought their sacrifices were lost to time. You have given them and all of them back a place in our story." Avery stepped forward and embraced Clara gently. "Thank you for sharing your family's memories with me. Without them, I would have been lost among letters and riddles." Clara nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. Next, a group of university students formed a line at the interactive kiosk, eager to navigate the digital map. Children passed an audio headphone from ear to ear, listening to Opal's diary entries while the brass whistle's note cut through the gallery. Others crowded the display case to examine the vial of Opal's comfort, marveling at its simplicity and the story of a nurse providing mercy in secret. After the crowd dispersed into small clusters, Rowan took Avery's arm. "Look, they're connecting with your grandmother's work," he said softly. "This is more than an exhibit. It's a living tribute." Avery breathed deeply. It's exactly what she dreamed of. She glanced toward Dr. Caldwell, who was chatting animatedly with the reporter from the local paper. Avery spotted Margaret's green journal, now encased under glass, and felt a surge of pride. From the moment she first turned that ivory envelope over in her hands to this very hour, every clue had pulled her deeper into her family's history and into a community of remembrance. As the sun climbed higher, beams of light struck the exhibit's windows at an angle that set speckles of dust dancing over the showcases. Avery and Rowan moved quietly through the gallery, overhearing snippets of conversation. "I never knew about these tunnels. Opal Baker, what a name. Imagine risking your life for perfect strangers." The words filled Avery's chest with warmth. At the exit, a visitor paused, pressing a hand to her heart as she read a placard, "We remember because we must, so that love and courage may guide us always." Avery caught the visitor's eye and offered a gentle nod. The woman smiled, tears shining, and whispered, "Thank you." Later, as the final guests drifted away and the curators began to dim the lights, Avery lingered by the baptismal chamber display, a detailed scale model complete with miniature stones and water. Ripples. She ran her fingers along the glass, imagining that she could still hear the hush of that underground pool and the whisper of Margaret's vow. Rowan joined her, handing her a cup of tea from the small refreshment table discreetly set to one side. Avery sipped and closed her eyes, letting the warmth settle. "We did it," she said, voice soft. "We carried the story forward." Rowan smiled and wrapped an arm around her. "There's more to do, of course. The book proposal, the lecture series, perhaps a documentary." His eyes gleamed with excitement. "But for tonight, let's savor this moment." Avery rested her head on his shoulder. "Good idea." She looked around the quiet gallery, knowing that each artifact they uncovered would continue to speak for itself long after the lights went out. And as they turned off the last spotlight, she whispered to the empty room, "Thank you, Aunt Margaret. Thank you, Opal. Thank you, Thomas, everyone who walked this path before me. I will not let your light fade." Hand in hand, they stepped into the evening air. Beyond the society's doors, Old Town Alexandria glowed under the first stars, alive with the echoes of hidden courage and the promise that history once reclaimed belongs to everyone. The exhibit had been open for only 3 weeks, but its impact had already rippled far beyond Alexandria. Local news outlets picked up the story first, then national journals, and finally a feature segment on public radio's Voices of the Past. Avery Sinclair found herself answering interview requests from historians, educators, and documentarians across the country. But amid the buzz and accolades, it was the letters, hundreds of handwritten letters, that moved her most. They came folded into envelopes bearing the names of small towns in Ohio, Georgia, Vermont, and even as far as San Antonio. Some were typed. Others were penned with trembling hands in faded ink. All of them spoke to a single truth: the story of Margaret Sinclair, Opal, and Thomas Baker, and the secret resistance beneath Old Town had awakened something long sleeping in the hearts of strangers. One Tuesday morning, as spring deepened and cherry blossoms carpeted the sidewalks in pale pink, Avery unlocked her post office box and retrieved another stack of envelopes. She smiled as she recognized a return address from a woman in Charleston who claimed to have discovered a matching whistle among her grandfather's belongings. Rowan stood beside her, holding 2 foam cups of strong black coffee, and watched her with a quiet pride. "You've become the Oakkeeper now," he said, handing her a cup. "The way Margaret was for the past. Now it's you." Avery glanced down at her fingers, stained slightly with the ink from reading and transcribing letters until late at night. "I don't know about that," she said with a soft laugh. "I think I'm just a steward, holding a lantern in a tunnel someone else dug." They stepped into the cool morning shade of Sinclair Row, a short lane that ran behind the Alexandria Historical Society. It was a narrow brick path now adorned with a new bronze plaque, dedicated to the Sinclair Baker Passage, and all those who dared to walk it in silence, for the sake of the light. Visitors often left magnolia blossoms and oak leaves on the plaque. That morning, someone had left a child's drawing stick figures holding hands beneath the tunnel ceiling lit with lanterns, and Avery felt her throat tighten. She paused in front of the old oak tree planted beside the museum, a gnarled, wide-trunked sentinel that her grandmother used to call the listening tree. Margaret often claimed, with a wink, that the oak had heard every secret whispered beneath Alexandria for 2 centuries. Avery slipped one of the letters from her bag and knelt to tuck it into the small wooden box now permanently affixed to the base of the tree, a public message board for those who wished to leave notes of remembrance or thanks. The letter she deposited was written by a man named Harold Myers, whose mother, it turned out, had once been nursed back to health in one of Opal's comfort tents. When she stood, she looked up at the great branches swaying above and whispered, "She saved so many, and now the world remembers." That afternoon, Avery returned to her family home, a row house just off Wolf Street that had belonged to the Sinclair family for 4 generations. The upstairs room, once filled with forgotten trunks and mismatched furniture, had been transformed into a research library. Books lined the walls. On a central table sat a framed photograph of Margaret and a stack of untouched journals wrapped in ribbon. Avery had waited for the right moment to open them. Margaret's final note had mentioned them in passing, "These are for you, my dearest, when you're ready to see me as I truly was, not just your grandmother, but a girl with dreams, fears, and flame." She untied the ribbon and opened the top journal. The first page was dated April 18, 1946, Margaret's first week in Alexandria after the war. Her voice rang out clearly in every word, a mixture of post-war hope, subtle anxiety, and the spark of rebellious empathy that had guided every decision she'd made since. "I arrived today in Old Town with nothing but a suitcase and my convictions. It smells of riverstone and possibility. I met a girl named Opal. She sings when she's nervous and carries a knife tucked in her apron. I think we'll be friends." Avery smiled, tears already blurring the ink. As the days passed, she read through one journal after another. She followed Margaret's heartaches, her first arguments with the church elders, her moments of fear while hiding fugitives under the floorboards of the music conservatory, her coded notes to Thomas Baker, and the terrifying day she was nearly caught. One page was marked only with a single pressed flower, a violet from the same garden behind Christ Church, and beneath it, the line, Opal held my hand and said, "The world may never know what we did. But love does not need a witness to be true." It was that line that gave Avery the idea. 2 weeks later, she stood on the steps of the Historical Society again, this time for a private unveiling. Rowan, Clara Mason, Dr. Caldwell, and a dozen others gathered before the old stone podium in the courtyard. A small plaque had been fixed into its face. Avery drew the silk cover from it and stepped back to reveal the engraving. The Listening Oak. Here we remember those who acted with quiet courage. Here we honor the whispered promises made in the dark. Here we carry their light into the open. A hush fell. Then Clara stepped forward, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "They would have been proud," she said simply. The group stayed for hours that afternoon. Clara recited lines from Opal's diary. Rowan projected photographs from the tunnels, now part of the permanent archive. Dr. Caldwell announced a traveling exhibit scheduled to appear at museums in Boston, New York, and eventually Chicago. But for Avery, the greatest moment came at sunset. As the sun dipped low, casting the listening oak in long golden shadow, a little girl approached the base and tucked a folded sheet of notebook paper into the message box. She turned to Avery and asked shyly, "Can I leave one too?" "My mom said Margaret helped save people like my great-uncle." Avery knelt. "Of course. That's what it's for." The girl smiled and ran back to her family. Avery stayed behind long after the others left, the city falling quiet around her. She sat beneath the oak, the breeze cool against her face, and opened one final letter from the stack she had saved. It was addressed from an unknown sender, the handwriting familiar yet unclaimed. Inside was a single sentence. "You have honored us with your light, Avery. Now live freely in your own story." There was no signature. No return address. Just the final truth. Avery folded the letter, placed it beside Margaret's portrait in her satchel, and rose. Tomorrow would be filled with press interviews, calls from publishers, and meetings with curators, but tonight, she would walk the streets her grandmother once walked, lantern in hand, retracing paths of mercy carved in stone and soul. And she would do it not in pursuit of answers, but in gratitude for love given, sacrifices made, and the quiet assurance that the past never truly dies when we dare to listen. The Potomac was glass that morning, unmoving, as though it, too, had paused to remember. Avery Sinclair stood barefoot at the edge of the old baptistery steps, the morning sunlight catching in her hair. Just behind her, hidden by a veil of mist rising off the river, was the stone channel where she had released her grandmother's scroll. It had been months since that moment, and yet its echoes lingered in her bones. Time, she had learned, didn't simply move forward, it circled, whispered, breathed. Today was not about discovery. Today was about closure. Behind her, the town stirred slowly to life. The bell atop Christ Church tolled 8 o'clock, its chime gentle against the hush of dawn. Rowan waited at the edge of the green with a small wooden box in his hands, an heirloom Margaret had once mentioned but never revealed. Clara Mason stood beside him, dressed in morning black, holding a folded American flag against her chest. And gathered across the lawn and spilling into the nearby square were dozens of others, volunteers from the Historical Society, local school teachers, the Sinclair cousins from Richmond, the baker, descendants from across Virginia. It was to be a memorial not only for Margaret Sinclair, whose ashes were to be released into the river, but for all those whose names were lost to secrecy, the messengers, the guides, the wounded, the saved. Avery turned and nodded. Rowan stepped forward, carrying the wooden box down the steps until it rested between them. It was hand-carved oak, inlaid with a ring of acorns around the initials M.S. He opened it with reverence. Inside, wrapped in silk, were Margaret's ashes and a bundle of letters unmailed, unspoken, unread. Avery recognized some of the handwriting. Many were addressed simply to "my dearest one." Some had never been signed at all. Clara stepped forward, unfolding a piece of parchment from Opal's diary. Her voice was clear and unwavering as she read. "If we must go unseen, let our love still leave footprints. Let no stone forget, no tree go without a story. And no child grow up thinking courage comes only with permission." When she finished, the crowd remained silent. No applause. Just breath. The wind curled around them like a sigh. Avery bent down, took a pinch of Margaret's ashes, and let them drift into the water. The rest followed in silence, the river accepting them gently, rippling only slightly as though in blessing. Rowan offered her a single magnolia blossom, which she placed on the surface, watching it float downstream until it vanished beneath the overhang of the Iron Horse Bridge. Then came the bells. Not from Christ Church this time, but from hand-held chimes distributed among the guests, each shaped like an oak leaf, each tuned to a different soft note. On Avery's signal, they rang once in unison. The sound was unlike any she'd ever heard, scattered, shimmering, rising like birds into the air before falling away into stillness. No hymn, no sermon. Just remembrance. After the gathering dispersed, Avery lingered by the water's edge. Rowan stood beside her, his hands tucked into his coat pockets, watching the sun begin its slow climb. "She'd have loved this," he said finally. Avery nodded. She never wanted statues or headlines. Just for the truth to breathe again. For the light to come back in. They turned and walked together toward the path that wound along the river, passing landmarks that had taken on new meaning. Christ Church's steeple now felt less like a symbol of doctrine and more like a lighthouse. The torpedo factory, once merely a point of interest, was now the very place where Margaret had transcribed secret plans late at night. The Spite House felt less like a novelty and more like a metaphor, a testament to resilience in small, cramped spaces. Back at Sinclair Row, they paused by the listening oak. More letters had been left folded, scrawled, colored by children. Avery sorted through a few of them. One was a poem by a second grader. Another simply said, "Thank you for the tunnels. My great-grandma ran in one." Rowan placed a hand on her back. "You ready for New York?" Avery blinked. "Almost." She smiled softly. The exhibit was being prepared to tour. The Hidden Histories team had partnered with the National Museum Consortium. First stop, the Museum of American History in D.C. Then the Tenement Museum in New York, and eventually the Civil Rights Trail Museum in Alabama. The curators had insisted that Avery accompany the first leg, not just as a scholar but as a witness. The most recent addition to the traveling display was a new multimedia piece, a projection mapping of the Sinclair Baker tunnels, with overlapping audio from Opal's diary and Margaret's journal. Entries. Visitors could walk through a scaled hallway and hear voices echoing as they stepped, whispers of instructions, lullabies sung in hiding, and finally, Margaret's own voice, recorded from an unearthed cassette, saying, "You were never alone in the dark. We were always with you, candle by candle, footstep by footstep." Avery had cried the first time she heard it. That night, as twilight settled over Old Town, Avery returned alone to the baptistery. She brought no scroll, no lantern, no relic. Just herself. She descended the stone steps slowly, breathing in the scent of water and moss. The chamber was quiet. The shallow pool reflected the first stars, and the river's current hummed gently through the hidden channel beyond. She knelt and placed a hand on the water's surface. "I carried the story," she whispered. "But I think the story also carried me." She opened her palm and let slip a final gift, Margaret's favorite silver locket, now empty of its photo. It sank quietly, no ripple, no fanfare. Just a soft gleam as it vanished. And as she rose, a breeze lifted from the tunnel, cool and clean, and in it she heard not words but something deeper. Memory. Belonging. Love. And with that, Avery Sinclair stepped into the night not as a seeker, but as the bearer of something eternal. The light that waits patiently in every shadow. For someone brave enough to follow it home. The train to Washington, D.C. pulled out of Alexandria just past sunrise, its gentle sway and metallic hum offering a rhythm both calming and full of anticipation. Avery Sinclair sat by the window, her journal open in her lap, the morning light flickering through the glass as it passed over trees, rooftops, and glistening rails. Across from her, Rowan read quietly, a museum press release tucked into his notebook. Between them, on the fold-down tray, sat a small velvet pouch containing the thimble, the pewter coin, and a new artifact found just 2 nights ago. It was a brass ring inscribed with the initials O. L. C. Oakleaf Circle, a name Margaret had briefly mentioned in one of her earliest journal entries. Back then, it had sounded like little more than poetic metaphor, a kind of secret club. But as Avery dug deeper into the archival boxes unearthed from the Sinclair home, a clearer picture emerged. Oakleaf Circle was a hidden network, a coalition of townsfolk who had, in the post-war years, quietly created safe passageways and signal stations throughout Alexandria to assist not only those fleeing Jim Crow laws, but also immigrants, war refugees, and even political dissidents. The ring, discovered inside the hollow base of an antique candelabra, was the final confirmation. And now, Avery was headed to the Smithsonian with it in her possession. As the train rumbled forward, she traced her finger over the engraving. "I used to think this was just about Margaret," she murmured. "But it's so much bigger. She was one branch, the whole tree was so much wider." Rowan nodded, smiling. "And you're one of its new roots." Avery flushed but didn't protest. Something in her had changed since the memorial. Since the scroll was released, and the listening oak had become a living archive of letters, poems, confessions, and dreams from people all over the world. Her inbox now overflowed not with news alerts, but with stories, family truths finally being spoken aloud, lost kindnesses remembered, quiet acts of resistance unearthed by children and grandchildren. That afternoon, inside the Smithsonian's American History Wing, Avery stood beside the exhibit's chief curator, a gentle-eyed woman named Dr. Leland, who wore gloves as she handled the brass ring and placed it in a velvet mount beside the other core artifacts. "This ring, Dr. Leland announced to the gathered press, symbolizes a forgotten unity. The Oakleaf Circle operated not with weapons or slogans, but with handshakes, songs, coded letters, and compassion. These were the underground librarians of justice, the midwives of mercy. Theirs was a movement of footsteps and lanterns, not headlines." Rowan squeezed Avery's hand. Cameras flashed. The museum's first international exhibition of 2026 was officially opened. In the weeks that followed, Hidden Histories became more than a museum event, it became a movement. University programs requested curriculum partnerships. A grassroots oral history initiative sprang up in more than 30 cities. A group of middle schoolers in Ohio formed their own Oakkeepers Club, and published a zine collecting untold stories of bravery from local elders. Avery herself was invited to speak at TEDx, where she stood on stage not as a historian, but as a granddaughter. She told the story of the thimble in the Market Square fountain, the music box in the vestry, the scroll laid gently on the river's skin, and the vow whispered from generation to generation. No one shall be left behind. Afterward, during the Q&A, a woman in her 70s stood up in the audience and said, "My father was one of the men your grandmother helped. He was quiet about it his whole life. We never knew. But last month, I found a pewter coin in his army chest. It had the same oak leaf." Avery smiled, tears bright. Then maybe, he was part of the circle too. That night, back in her hotel room, Avery opened her journal. On the final page, beneath Margaret's old oak leaf sketch, she began to write. "Legacy isn't what we leave behind. It's what we pass forward. A candle in a window, a whisper in a tunnel. A name carved softly in wood. We are the keepers now. We carry the ring. She closed the book. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars fallen to earth, and Avery felt her grandmother's presence not behind her but beside her, walking forward. And the next morning, when she returned to Alexandria, she placed a new plaque beneath the listening oak. It read, "The Oakkeeper's Legacy. For every hidden hand that reached out. For every quiet voice that guided. For every name never spoken. We remember. We carry you onward." The wind picked up, scattering cherry petals across the plaque like blessings. And Avery, the new Oakkeeper, stood still beneath the branches, smiling. Because the past was no longer buried. It was blooming. A hush fell over the wide halls of the Library of Congress. Its vaulted ceilings echoed with distant footsteps, and high windows cast golden light in great shafts across marble floors. Avery Sinclair stood at the threshold of the manuscripts division, heart pounding gently, eyes tracing the carved words above the door. That wisdom may flourish, liberty endure, and knowledge be increased. It had been 5 months since the launch of Hidden Histories, Secrets of the Sinclair Resistance. The exhibit was now on its third national stop, having visited Boston and Chicago. Each city revealed new connections, new stories sparked by Margaret's journals, Opal's music box, or the baptismal scroll. Letters poured in daily, and Avery had begun archiving them under a newly founded initiative, the Whispering Archives, an open-source repository of hidden histories told by descendants, neighbors, and anonymous voices across America. Now she was here donating the original Sinclair Baker collection to the Library of Congress itself. Beside her, Rowan adjusted his blazer collar, holding a black case embossed with an oak leaf, the same symbol etched on the ring discovered in Margaret's candelabra. Inside the case lay the full original set, Margaret's emerald journal, Opal's diary, Thomas Baker's photo, the pewter coin, the thimble, the vial of Opal's comfort, the music box, the baptismal scroll, and a sealed envelope containing Margaret's unpublished letters, her final thoughts, addressed to the ones yet to come. Dr. Arnav Desai, the chief archivist, stepped forward with a quiet smile and extended a gloved hand. Ms. Sinclair. Mr. Miller. On behalf of the library, we're honored to receive your family's legacy. His voice was low, reverent. We have prepared a climate-controlled archive and created both physical and digital pathways for public access. These items will not only be preserved, they will be alive, part of the national dialogue. Avery felt her chest swell. That's exactly what she wanted. Not for these to sit behind glass, but to speak to others. Dr. Desai led them into a private reading room, its wooden shelves lined with centuries of knowledge. On the central table lay a soft velvet display mat. Rowan opened the case, and they laid each item down with care. The archivists documented and photographed every artifact as Dr. Desai carefully scanned the wax seal on Margaret's final letters. Avery hesitated. "You'll read them, right?" "Her letters." "Dr." Desai nodded. "Only with your permission." "But yes. And when the time is right, we'll publish them unedited." Avery nodded, fighting back tears. That afternoon, a press release titled "Whispering Archives, a Legacy Enshrined" was published on the library's official website. The story of Margaret Sinclair and the Oakleaf Circle was now more than a traveling exhibit, it was a permanent part of America's historical fabric. But Avery's work wasn't done. Back in Alexandria the following week, she and Rowan stood inside the former Oak and Ember antique shop. Margaret's old post had been lovingly restored not as a shop, but as a community storytelling center. The name above the window now read, "The Whispering Archive, Alexandria Branch." Inside, shelves held printed transcripts, oral recordings, and hundreds of submitted letters from across the country. A touch-screen map let visitors explore tunnels and stories from coast to coast. There was even a room dedicated to children's drawings and school projects inspired by the exhibit. One corner, known as Opal's Garden, featured soft lighting, magnolia plants, and a speaker that played her favorite music box melody on loop. Avery placed her palm on the center table, where a framed inscription read, "Every voice matters. Every silence carries a story. Speak. Remember. Listen." That evening, a local storytelling night was held under the listening oak. Candles flickered in mason jars. People of all ages gathered on blankets and benches. An elderly man shared the story of his mother hiding Jewish families in her Chicago boarding house. A teenage girl read a poem inspired by the Baptistery scroll. Rowan read a newly discovered letter from Thomas Baker himself, one he had written but never sent to Opal during his time stationed overseas. His words cracked with longing, ending simply, "You were my home before I knew I needed one." When it was Avery's turn, she rose and held up Margaret's ring. "I used to think history was something that happened far away," she said. "In books, in museums. But now I know it's what lives in the letters we never sent, in the footsteps we took without fanfare, in the songs we hummed in tunnels, hoping for morning." She paused. "We are the Oakkeepers now. Not because we inherited it, but because we chose to listen." The crowd was silent for a long moment, then erupted into applause, not loud or chaotic, but soft, sustained, a ripple of shared understanding. Later that night, under starlight and breeze, Avery sat alone beneath the listening oak. She held a fresh letter in her lap. It was from a boy in New Mexico who had found a box of journals from his great-grandmother, revealing her work as a translator for Japanese Americans during the internment years. His note ended, "I thought no one would care. But maybe I was wrong." Avery folded the letter and slipped it into the box at the oak's roots. And for a long while, she sat in silence, listening not just to the wind or the leaves, but to something deeper. The past breathing. The present awakening. And the future calling. And the oak whispered back, "We are still here. Keep going." Avery Sinclair awoke to the sound of soft rain pattering against the windows of the Sinclair row house. The scent of petrichor drifted in through the cracked sash above her desk, mingling with the familiar musk of aged paper and lavender wax. Outside, Old Town Alexandria was cloaked in a gentle gray, a world suspended in pause, as if holding its breath between the pages of a great book. She sat curled in a quilt, Margaret's emerald journal resting open in her lap. The ink on the final entries had faded slightly with time, but the strength of the voice remained, each word a whisper carved deep into the walls of memory. She had read these pages 100 times, and yet that morning, something new had caught her eye, a cipher scribbled in the margin, one she had mistaken as a flourish or idle doodle until now. It was a sequence of symbols, oak leaves, acorns, and musical notes arranged in an alternating pattern. The longer she stared at it, the clearer it became, a code. And not just any code, it was one of Margaret's historical substitution ciphers, the kind she had used in her university days to correspond with other resistance historians when discussing sensitive or suppressed material. Avery's heart skipped. With shaking fingers, she transcribed the pattern onto fresh parchment, substituting letters based on an old cipher key she remembered from one of Margaret's earlier notebooks. 10 minutes later, the message appeared, letter by letter, like a ghost surfacing through fog. The true archive was never mine alone. Find the one who walked before me. Her story begins beneath the Ashburn press. Avery blinked. Ashburn Press. She knew that name. It had been a small, radical publishing house active in the 1930s and 1940s, tucked behind a train depot, now little more than a shadow, its building long abandoned, its records scattered or sealed. But Margaret had mentioned it in passing once, calling it a lighthouse during the blackout of truth. Rowan entered the room holding 2 mugs of hot tea. He caught the look on her face immediately. "What did you find?" Avery held up the journal. "A cipher. Margaret left us another trail, one that leads to someone before her. A woman connected to the Oakleaf circle, someone whose story was never told." He placed the mugs on the windowsill and leaned closer, scanning the decrypted message. "Ashburn Press. Isn't that the place we thought had burned down in the 50s? "Exactly." Avery stood, the quilt falling away. "But the foundation still exists. And if Margaret hid something there, if it predates even her work, then we've only scratched the surface." Less than an hour later, they stood before the crumbling facade of the Ashburn Press building, its brickwork swallowed in ivy and moss. Rain trickled down broken window panes. The old oak signage faded, but still visible, hung askew above the warped door. Avery ran her fingers along the threshold, her palm brushing over a carved emblem half hidden beneath the rot. An oak leaf encircled by an inkwell. Rowan found a rusted keyhole beneath a false panel. Avery inserted the pewter key they had used for the baptistery vault, unsure if it would work. With a soft groan, the door clicked open. Inside, the building smelled of damp wood, ink, and forgotten years. Faded pages clung to warped shelves, some titles still legible beneath mildew. Old typewriters sat like skeletal sentinels on long tables. A single cracked window allowed enough light to reveal what Margaret's code had pointed to a trapdoor at the back of the press room, beneath a warped editorial desk. They cleared the debris and pried it open. A narrow staircase descended into shadow. Lantern in hand, Avery led the way. The staircase opened into a modest chamber lined with filing cabinets, each labeled not with dates, but with names. Notable ones. Strange ones. Dozens of unfamiliar surnames mixed with a few she recognized from Margaret's journals: Opal, Thomas, Josephine. And one stood alone, mounted above a desk. Lenore Alcott, keeper before the keeper. Avery reached for the top drawer. Inside lay a bundle of letters wrapped in silk ribbon, and a photo of a young woman in round glasses and a newsboy cap, grinning beside a printing press. The letters were addressed not to Margaret but to someone named Josiah, a name that appeared nowhere in the Sinclair or Baker archives. She opened the first letter, dated March 3, 1937. Dearest J. We published the second pamphlet today. A woman from the market came crying, said her son was taken by the authorities for speaking out. We will not stop. The tunnel beneath the print shop now connects to the old whiskey lane near King Street. I pray no one will follow us down. I still see lanterns in my dreams. L. Rowan whistled. So Margaret wasn't the first oakkeeper. No, Avery whispered, awe in her voice. There were others. Lenore Alcott was one of them. Maybe the first. And she wasn't just documenting, she was printing. Spreading truth. They spent the rest of the day cataloging the space, photographing every document, cross-referencing names. The tunnel Lenore mentioned, Whiskey Lane, matched an old Prohibition route that Margaret had once dismissed as folklore. But now, Avery saw it differently. These were layers of legacy. Generations handing off the torch, one to the next, underground and unspoken, yet unstoppable. By nightfall, they returned to the Listening Oak and placed Lenore's first letter into the message box, its contents already digitized and saved. Later, Avery recorded a new entry for the Whispering Archives podcast, now syndicated in 5 cities. Before Margaret, there was Lenore. Before the lanterns of the tunnels, there was the ink of the press. And behind each name we know, there are a dozen we don't. The Oakleaf circle wasn't one generation. It was and is a relay of resilience. We don't inherit the light. We earn it, every time we choose truth over silence. She paused. And we're not done. Not even close. That night, as rain continued to fall and the branches of the listening oak shivered in wind, Avery closed her eyes to sleep. She dreamed of footsteps underground, of printing presses humming in secret, of acorns passed hand to hand. And in the distance, a lantern glowed waiting to be found. The following morning broke clear and windless, the kind of morning that felt almost hollow after days of storm. Alexandria shimmered under a fresh blue sky, the puddles reflecting fragments of old rooftops, chimney stacks, and steeples. In the center of it all, just beyond the reach of passing tourists and cobblestone tours, the Ashburn Press building sat with its secrets breathing again. Inside the old printing house's basement, the air still held the scent of dust and wet ink. Avery Sinclair stood beneath a bare filament bulb, holding up a delicate stack of correspondence. They had spent most of the night sorting through Lenore Alcott's archives pages of fiery editorials, encoded maps, and what she and Rowan now realized were early logbooks of the Echo Line, a resistance route that predated Margaret's tunnels by nearly 2 decades. "This is it," Avery whispered. "This is the thread Margaret must have followed. It didn't start with her. It started here with Lenore, with the Echo Line." Rowan looked over her shoulder, eyes flicking across the yellowing pages. "And look at these initials." He pointed to a margin note, passed to E. G. At Southwell Gate, 1942. E. G. Avery murmured. "Edith Grant. That name's on the baptism scroll. She was one of the original station keepers at the Riverside Tunnel. That means the Echo Line merged into the Oakleaf Circle." They exchanged a glance, part shock, part exhilaration. Avery stepped back from the desk, swept a hand across the cabinet fronts. "We thought Margaret created the network," she said, breath-catching. "But she was continuing it. Building on it. These people, they were generations ahead of her. Quiet engineers of resistance." Rowan was already photographing the logbooks. "We'll need a new branch in the archive. A whole series. Echo Line files. And we'll need to map it." That afternoon, they met with Dr. Emma Caldwell, curator at the Alexandria Historical Society. They unrolled an annotated parchment map onto the center table, its creases worn thin. It showed Alexandria's old utility lines, overlaid with narrow markings in faded pencil routes from Ashburn Press to the Conservatory tunnels, the Baptistery, Market Square, and finally, the dockside. Rose Arbor. "These aren't just tunnel paths," Rowan said. "They're relay points." Each location marked was a whisper station. People dropped messages, passed supplies, moved people. Avery tapped her finger on the mark labeled S. G. "Southwell Gate," she whispered. "One of the few places left untouched by modern development." Dr. Caldwell adjusted her glasses. "If what you've uncovered is accurate, the Echo Line wasn't just a precursor to the Oakleaf Circle, it was a blueprint. A city-wide infrastructure built to survive invisibly." "And it did," Avery said softly. Right under our feet. With Dr. Caldwell's help, they organized a weekend excavation. Volunteers from local historical preservation groups arrived with gloves, headlamps, and survey gear. The entrance to Southwell Gate, a wrought iron arch now overgrown behind a retirement home, was cleared away, revealing a stone drainage outlet sealed decades earlier. They broke through the covering carefully. Inside was a low passageway, its ceiling rounded and bricked with careful symmetry. The smell of age was immediate: earth, rust, and ghosted paper. Candles had once been lit here. Oil lamps, maybe. Along the wall were chalk marks. Symbols, oak leaves, pine cones, crossed lanterns. Beneath their feet, a worn track of footprints still pressed faintly into the dust. The team moved forward in hushed reverence. Midway down the tunnel, Rowan stopped suddenly. "Avery," he called. "There's something here." At his feet lay a rusted iron case. Inside were dozens of sealed envelopes, each labeled only with a date and a word. Avery lifted one: June 1943, Mercy. Another, December 1944, Passage. Another still, March 1947, Song. "These are testimonials," she whispered. "Maybe confessions. Maybe poems. These are the voices of the echo line." They collected the case and continued onward, passing a ladder chute that once opened into the back of the old sugar mill, and finally arriving at an open stone chamber that smelled faintly of clove and coal. At the center was a wooden table, legs sunken into the earth, but still upright. And on it, a ring of charred candle stubs surrounded a carved inscription. "We speak so the silence won't be alone. L. A. Lenore Alcott's signature." Avery stepped back, breath trembling. It was not just a message, it was a mantra, passed down through the circle. A thread woven deep into Margaret's vows, Opal's lullabies, and now into her own work. That evening, the echo line chamber was sealed again, this time protected and marked for conservation. The contents of the iron case were logged and stored. The Alexandria Historical Society began planning a second exhibit, the Echo Line, Letters from Beneath. Dr. Caldwell invited Avery to lead the curation. But even more extraordinary, the letters in the case were not just from Alexandria. Some bore return addresses from Baltimore, Philadelphia, even Boston, names tied to rail stations, boarding houses, libraries. The Echo Line had been far more expansive than anyone had imagined. Later that night, back in the Whispering Archives Center, Avery sat beneath the listening oak, holding the letter labeled March 1947, Song. It read, "I was 16 when they pulled my brother from the bus. He had a satchel of papers and a harmonica. They broke the papers, not the music. I carried it in my coat until I reached Southwell Gate. They told me I could sing it aloud here. So I did. and someone sang it back. Avery exhaled, pressing the letter to her chest. The wind rustled the branches above her. She thought of Lenore's printing press, of Margaret's scroll on the river, of Opal's soft voice in the vestry loft. The resistance hadn't ended. It had simply gone quiet, waiting for the right ears to hear. She stood, pulled her phone from her coat, and sent a single message to Rowan. We need to create a national listening network. A digital echo line. Open source. Oral histories, written memories, encrypted if necessary. The silence doesn't get to win. The reply came in under a minute. Already sketching the interface. Let's call it Project Lantern. That night, Avery returned to her desk, opened a fresh page in her journal, and wrote. The echo line isn't a place. It's a promise. To speak. To carry. To answer the call. And as moonlight pooled across the floor, she swore she could hear it, the softest hum, rising from below the city, like a song once buried deep, finally rising back to the surface. Avery Sinclair had never seen a map like this before. It glowed faintly on her laptop screen in a darkened room, each pulse like the heartbeat of a buried star. The interface was simple, black background, faint lines mimicking tunnels, and hundreds of slowly pulsing points of light scattered across the digital surface. Each one represented a story. A letter. A memory unearthed. And all of them were part of Project Lantern, the national listening network that she and Rowan had envisioned just 2 weeks earlier. And now, it was alive. Click 1, Rowan said, leaning over her shoulder. Just pick anywhere. Avery scrolled toward the Midwest and selected a pulsing gold dot labeled Toledo, Ohio. A file opened with a handwritten letter from 1961. It read, We used to hang the white cloth behind the attic window. 1 not for safe, 2 for danger. My aunt passed letters that way to the man who brought bread and ink and messages from the post office. His name was Malcolm. I never knew his last name. But I know he saved people. I was 12. I never forgot. She leaned back in her chair, breath caught somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. It's working, she whispered. They're really sending them. Rowan tapped the screen gently. That's the 3rd one from Ohio today. We've got new uploads from Richmond, Charleston, Albany, even Phoenix. He turned toward her with a small grin. Turns out, people have been waiting a long time to tell the truth. Project Lantern was no longer just a whisper. It was a chorus, and it had spread faster than they could have imagined. The concept had been simple: create a secure digital network where anyone could upload hidden stories of resistance, mercy, or witness from the war years, the civil rights era, immigration waves, or even modern events still too raw to name. The system would allow anonymous entries, encourage archival tagging, and offer optional encryption. Each submission would be assigned a lantern ID, forming part of a greater mosaic that linked back always to the root, the echo line and the Oakleaf circle. And best of all, each new story lit up the map, a constellation of voices once buried, now shining again. That weekend, Avery hosted the first lantern gathering at the Whispering Archive Center in Alexandria. The room, once cluttered with antiques and forgotten heirlooms, now glowed with warm strings of actual lanterns hung from ceiling beams, and the scent of clove tea and cedarwood oil drifted through the space. People arrived not to browse, but to share. A young man brought a letter from his grandfather, a porter on the Southern rail lines who had once smuggled banned books across state borders. A retired librarian recalled hiding radical newspapers in fake encyclopedias during the McCarthy era. A middle schooler read a short poem written by her mother after the fall of Saigon. And Avery reads something she had never shared publicly before. It was a letter Margaret Sinclair had written to her own mother, dated 1958, never mailed. Avery had found it tucked between pages of her grandmother's third journal. Mama, I want to tell you everything, but I cannot. Not yet. If I do, I endanger them. I endanger you. But someday, if this city breathes easier, if the tunnels are empty and no longer afraid, then I hope someone finds my papers and knows. We did not run. We stayed. We stood. We sang underground, and the song never broke. Please forgive the silence. It was the only way to keep the light from going out. There wasn't a dry eye in the room when Avery finished. Silence followed, long and reverent, before a soft clap broke the spell. Then another. And another. And soon, the room burst into applause, not in celebration, but in recognition. These were not heroes of history books. These were our people, quietly brave, forgotten by time, now arising again. That night, under the branches of the listening oak, Avery sat with her notebook and wrote. The world does not need louder voices. It needs truer ones. Softer voices that carry further. Not by volume but by truth. And if you light a lantern for one story, you may illuminate 100 more waiting in the dark. By the next morning, Project Lantern had surpassed 10,000 contributions. Requests came in from local libraries asking for community access points. The Smithsonian offered a dedicated terminal for browsing the archive. The National Archives requested a private meeting to discuss collaboration. And then came the unexpected. An encrypted packet from someone claiming to represent the Alcott Continuum. Avery opened it cautiously. The message was brief. Lenore was not alone. There were others who never entered your grandmother's records by choice, not omission. We protected the outer echo lines. We still do. You've activated something larger than you know. Be ready. The final vault is not in Alexandria. It's in Philadelphia. We left the signal in the bell. There was no sender name. No traceable IP. Avery's mind raced. She called Rowan immediately. "Pack your bag," she said. He didn't ask why. They were on the next train north. The journey to Philadelphia felt different, more urgent, more mythical. As the city skyline grew in the distance, Avery read and reread the message. The signal in the bell. Her thoughts leapt instantly to Independence Hall, the Liberty Bell, but could that be too obvious? The minute they arrived, they walked the old historic district. Rowan traced landmarks from a digital map overlaying the Project Lantern data, while Avery checked her grandmother's Philadelphia travel logs from 1955. There it was, one brief line: met L. A. Contact at Bell House. Left lantern token in the step. Bell House. It wasn't the Liberty Bell. It was Bell House, a small Quaker meeting house 2 blocks south, long closed to the public. The side steps were crumbling limestone, ringed with iron. Avery knelt and ran her fingers under the edge of the 3rd step, and there, exactly as described, her fingernails caught a rusted panel. She pried it loose. Inside lay a small brass object. At first glance, it looked like a broken pendant. But as she turned it over, she realized it was a hollow locket shaped like a lantern, its side engraved with the same symbol from Lenore's journal. An oak leaf, pierced by a quill. Inside the locket was a thin strip of vellum etched in barely visible ink. Rowan squinted at it. "Coordinates," he murmured. "Or maybe grid markers." They looked at each other. The hunt had begun again. And somewhere in the heart of Philadelphia, buried under the layers of a city built on freedom, lay the final chamber of the Echo Line, sealed for 70 years, its stories untouched. Avery felt a new vow form in her chest. "I will follow this line until its last note is sung. Until every whisper is heard. Until every lantern is lit." And with Rowan at her side, map in hand and history pulsing in her bones, she stepped back into the shadows, ready to carry the light even deeper. The early morning in Philadelphia was draped in a cloak of reverence. Broad, weathered streets carried the hushed echo of revolution, and red brick buildings leaned toward the sidewalk like elders remembering stories. Avery Sinclair stood beneath the rising sun, gripping the brass lantern locket as if it pulsed with warmth, her mind spinning with questions, coordinates, and a history she had only just begun to glimpse. Rowan adjusted the leather strap of his messenger bag. Coordinates decoded to an alley behind Walnut Street. Narrow. Unlisted. Might have been a service path in the 1800s. He held up his phone, where the Lantern Project's grid overlay shimmered faintly. "There's a strange energy cluster registered here. 6 submissions from this exact square meter. All anonymous." Avery glanced around. The alley was barely wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side, flanked by the blank brick walls of what had once been a Quaker printing house. To most, it was nothing more than a forgotten corridor in the city's underbelly, but to Avery, it hummed. They approached a section of wall marked by faint graffiti, no words, just an old carved image of a bell. Below it, an embedded iron ring jutted out from the stone foundation. "Doorbell?" Rowan asked with a nervous grin. Avery shook her head. "Anchor." She grabbed the ring and twisted. Something clicked deep, mechanical, and low. A segment of brick slid back with a groan, revealing a slanted shaft just wide enough for a body to descend. Cold air drifted up like a sigh held too long. They exchanged one glance. Rowan nodded. "I've got your back." Avery descended first, boots finding footholds carved directly into the stone. The tunnel was tight but clean, the walls solid with expertly laid brick. At the bottom, the shaft opened into a wider corridor, lit faintly by remnants of phosphorescent paint guiding marks from decades past. The path curved downward, and after several turns, they entered a circular chamber lined with archival drawers, wooden cabinets, and sealed crates. In the center, covered in dust but perfectly preserved, was a glass case shaped like a bell. Within it sat a manuscript. Avery stepped closer, brushing away a veil of cobwebs. The manuscript bore no title on the cover, only a pressed oak leaf gilded in gold, and beneath it, 3 initials, L. A. C. "Lenore Alcott Callahan," Avery whispered. She changed her name. This isn't just her journal. It's her legacy. Rowan opened a crate nearby. Inside were more letters, hundreds. Names that had never surfaced in Project Lantern. Names lost to history but protected in secret. One envelope rested atop the pile, thicker than the rest. Rowan unfolded it and read aloud. "To the keeper who comes when the bell rings. If you are reading this, then the line has survived. You stand where many have stood before, not in glory, not in recognition, but in duty. We were never heroes. We were pages between chapters. The vault you now enter is the final one I built. It houses the master ledger of the Echo Line, a record of those we saved, those we lost, and those who carried the light onward when all hope dimmed. Do not publish it? Not yet. Instead, pass it forward one story at a time. Let each name bloom in the right season. Our oaths were not to monuments, but to memory. Let liberty endure, quietly. Let love outlast the silence. Lenore." Avery closed her eyes, heart pounding. It wasn't meant for a museum. It wasn't meant to be consumed. She looked around. It was meant to be protected. Passed on deliberately. Carefully. They spent hours cataloging the contents of the chamber. Every envelope bore initials, every drawer contained cross-referenced codes. Among them, Avery found one labeled M.S. dated March 1964. She opened it gently, discovering a letter Margaret had sent to Lenore after discovering the vault for the first time herself. Dear Lenore, I found your manuscript. I followed your trail from the bells to the ink to the garden steps. Your voice was the first lantern I ever saw. I have lit my own since then. I hope they reach you, wherever you've gone. M. Avery clutched the letter to her chest. She came here. She already knew. And she left it untouched. That's why it wasn't in her journals. She honored the vow. Rowan stepped beside her, lifting a second manuscript from a narrow drawer. But look at this. He held it toward her. On its cover, the choir below, a codex of subterranean songs. It was a songbook not of music, but of poems, verses, oaths, and whispered blessings that had been passed along the echo line. One page read: When the church above went quiet, we sang below the stone. In oil and ink, in whisper breath, we build our truth alone. Rowan whispered, it's a whole other language. And it was. Dozens of coded verses filled the book, chants disguised as hymns, messages embedded in harmonics. Some were prayers, others protest poems. A few were lullabies that carried double meanings. Back above ground, Avery contacted Dr. Caldwell, requesting a new section in the Whispering Archive, the Bell Chamber Codex, a protected archive within Project Lantern for materials not meant for wide release, but for earned access. Historians, descendants, protectors of the line. As the sun set over the city, Avery and Rowan stood beneath the Liberty Bell, not for photos, not for fanfare, but simply to listen. The tourists had gone. The air buzzed with quiet. She touched the crack in the metal and whispered, the bell rang for freedom once. Now it rings for remembrance. They boarded the train home that evening, the manuscript secure in Avery's satchel, the first codex tucked safely in Rowan's coat. And as the city faded behind them, they knew they had crossed a threshold not just into deeper history, but into a guardianship far older than Margaret or Lenore. It belonged to all those who had kept the light, passed the messages, and trusted that one day, someone would come back to finish the vow. And so, with dusk settling over the rails, Avery opened her journal and wrote, the bell is not silent. It echoes beneath every page, every stone, every name whispered in hope. I am not the end of this line. I am its voice. And I will keep ringing. The lanterns burned on. The crisp morning air in Boston held a sharpness that spoke of both spring's promise and winter's lingering grasp. Avery Sinclair stepped from the train at South Station, the bustle of the city a stark contrast to the quiet tunnels and cobblestone streets of Alexandria. But her purpose here was clear. The Echo Line had extended beyond Virginia, threading through cities like Boston, Philadelphia, and beyond a sprawling web of resistance and remembrance. Now, she was following the path to the Old North Church, a place whispered about in the coded letters and secret maps uncovered in the Vault of Liberty. Rowan trailed behind, his gaze sweeping over the historic brick facades lining Salem Street. "This church," he said, "is where the famous 1 by land, 2 by sea lantern signal was sent. If our ancestors chose it for secret meetings or signals, it makes sense it's part of the network." Avery nodded. She clutched the small oak leaf pendant resting against her heart, a symbol they had come to know as the mark of those who carried the light through dark times. Inside the church, the heavy oak doors creaked open to reveal the sanctuary's simple elegance: dark wooden pews, stained glass windows that filtered in soft hues of crimson and gold, and the high ceiling where the iconic twin lanterns once hung. The air smelled faintly of beeswax and old parchment. As they explored the crypt beneath, Avery's flashlight revealed carved initials on the cold stone walls, marks left by generations who had sought refuge, whispered secrets, or paid homage. There, nestled in a carved niche, was an ancient ledger bound in worn leather, marked with the symbol of an oak leaf intertwined with a quill. Avery carefully opened the ledger, revealing detailed entries: names, dates, safe house locations, and cryptic notes. Among them were records of clandestine meetings, messages sent via lantern signals atop the church's steeple, and references to an elusive group called the Guardian's Watch. The Guardian's Watch, Avery realized, was the next evolution of the Echo Line Keepers, tasked not only with passing messages but with protecting the physical and spiritual legacy of resistance. Their mission was to ensure the stories, the sacrifices, and the light never faded into obscurity. That evening, as shadows lengthened over Boston's historic district, Avery and Rowan attended a secret gathering hosted by descendants of the Watch. In a dimly lit cellar adorned with oak carvings and lanterns, they listened to tales passed down through generations, stories of courage, betrayal, hope, and unbreakable bonds. One elder, a woman named Eliza Grant, recounted how her grandmother had hidden manuscripts beneath floorboards, how songs sung in secret carried encoded messages, and how the Watch's silent oath had kept communities connected through perilous times. Inspired and humbled, Avery knew their journey was far from over. The Guardian's Watch was alive in whispers, in memories, and now in the hearts of those willing to carry the lantern forward. As the meeting concluded, Avery and Rowan stepped into the cool Boston night, lanterns in hand, ready to continue the legacy, one story, one step, one light at a time. Boston's night wrapped around Avery and Rowan like a velvet cloak, thick with the scent of salt water and history. The echo of distant church bells mingled with the quiet footsteps along narrow alleys, as they traced the routes once taken by the Guardian's Watch. Their destination, an underground chamber whispered about in letters and half-forgotten journals, a secret vault rumored to hold the earliest records of the Resistance's beginnings. Descending a spiral staircase hidden behind a crumbling brick wall, they entered a vaulted crypt lined with weathered stone and faint inscriptions. The air was cool and musty, alive with centuries of secrets. Soft candlelight flickered from iron sconces, casting dancing shadows that seemed to watch and wait. At the chamber's center stood a heavy oak chest bound in iron, etched with the intertwined oak leaf and quill symbol of the Guardians. Avery's hands trembled as she produced the pewter key, its surface worn smooth by years of passage through unseen hands. The lock clicked open, revealing brittle parchments, faded photographs, and delicate artifacts, tokens of courage and proof of enduring hope. Among the treasures was a manuscript titled The Covenant of Light, chronicling the Watch's founding principles: unwavering commitment to truth, protection of the vulnerable, and passing the flame of Knowledge through generations. Pages detailed clandestine meetings, coded messages sent by lantern light, and the names of countless unsung heroes. Rowan carefully unfolded a letter dated 1775, written in elegant script by an unknown woman who described secret gatherings beneath the very streets they now walked, gatherings where ideas of freedom and justice were born. The legacy was deeper and older than they had imagined. As dawn broke over Boston, Avery and Rowan emerged from the shadows, carrying the weight of history with them. They knew their journey was far from over. The path of the Guardians was a winding one, lit by the flickering yet unyielding light of countless souls who refused to be silenced. Together, beneath the awakening city, they vowed to keep the lantern burning bright, illuminating the past, guiding the present, and inspiring the future. The soft glow of lantern light flickered through the narrow passageways beneath Boston's cobblestone streets. Avery and Rowan moved carefully, the echo of their footsteps a quiet rhythm in the vast silence of the underground. The air was cool, tinged with the scent of damp earth and old paper, a scent Avery had come to associate with truth waiting to be uncovered. They were following the last known coordinates from the Covenant of Light, a place only hinted at in faded manuscripts, the final passage, a hidden chamber where the earliest Guardians had vowed to preserve the legacy of courage and compassion. At the end of a twisting tunnel, they found a heavy iron door, its surface etched with symbols of oak leaves intertwined with quills and stars. Avery inserted the pewter key, and with a reluctant groan, the door swung open to reveal a small vaulted room. Inside, a circle of stone seats surrounded a low pedestal. Upon it rested a leather-bound tome, the Chronicles of the Oakleaf Circle, a meticulously detailed record of the people, places, and promises that had shaped generations of resistance. Alongside the tome lay a delicate lantern, its glass etched with a single word, hope. Avery opened the book with reverence, tracing the names and stories that filled its pages. These were the voices of those who had acted in the shadows, whose deeds were never recorded in public history, but whose impact shaped the course of justice and freedom. Rowan whispered, "This is the heart of the echo line. The soul of the Guardians." Together, they lifted the lantern, its light warm and steady. Avery spoke softly, "We carry this light forward. We are its keepers now." Back above ground, the first light of dawn bathed Old Town Alexandria in gold and rose hues. Avery stood beneath the listening oak, the gentle breeze stirring its branches as if whispering ancient secrets. Around her, friends, family, and community members gathered, their faces alight with hope and remembrance. A large plaque had been unveiled, engraved with words that captured the journey and the promise they all shared. For those who walked unseen. For those who spoke in whispers. For those who carried the light. When all else seemed dark. We remember, we honor, we carry on. Avery raised the lantern from the final passage, now safely enshrined within the community center, and passed its glow from hand to hand. Each person's eyes reflected the flame, a symbol not just of history, but of ongoing resilience and unity. As the crowd sang a hymn of hope, Avery felt a profound peace. The journey that began with a simple ivory envelope had grown into a living legacy, a testament to love, courage, and the power of stories told and heard. The past was never truly lost. It lived on in every whispered vow, every hidden path, every flickering lantern. And as the sun climbed higher, Avery knew this was only the beginning. The light would never fade. Tuda. The Oakleaf Legacy, a journey through hidden histories and silent courage. Amota. Embark on a captivating journey with Avery Sinclair as she uncovers a secret legacy hidden beneath the streets of Old Town Alexandria and beyond. From mysterious ivory envelopes and ancient journals to clandestine tunnels and coded letters, Avery follows the footsteps of courageous ancestors Margaret Sinclair, Opal Baker, Lenore Alcott, and the Guardians Watch, who quietly fought for justice, mercy, and freedom through generations. This epic tale weaves history, mystery, and personal discovery into a rich tapestry of resilience, love, and hope. Through archival exhibits, digital networks, and heartfelt testimonies, Avery brings to light the untold stories of the Echo Line and Oakleaf Circle, honoring those who walked unseen but never forgot. The Oakleaf Legacy is more than a story of the past, it's a living promise that the light of truth and compassion endures, passed from hand to hand, generation to generation. Join Avery as she carries the lantern forward, uncovering the power of whispered vows, the strength of hidden voices, and the eternal flame that guides us all toward justice and remembrance.